with time right
All
behind you. Oh, there
right.
you go.
Perfect. All right. We are live. Hey, Joe. It's so exciting to be here on this Dudo webinar. I think people are going to be, kind of strolling in here so you and I can chit
Mhm.
chat for a couple minutes here. But Anton just told me that your favorite color is orange and that you're wearing Dudo orange. So I don't know. Was that on purpose?
I don't know if I'm wearing Doodle orange. I'm wearing Joe Polizzi must always wear orange, orange. Yeah, nobody wants
It was
no
kismet. See, it was
yeah,
perfect.
nobody wants to hear the story, but when I first started into business and got into content marketing, the colors that we picked were orange and gray. So I was like, "Oh, I got to wear orange everywhere." I just started wearing orange shirts. And then people started recognizing me like that. And I went to one conference and I didn't wear orange. And I had three people come up to me and say, "Are you feeling all right? Like, why no orange?" And I'm like, "Okay, I must have branded myself that way."
You inadvertently made that your thing,
And I
yeah.
got rid of all my non-orange colors. So now it's really
Oh.
easy because I go into the
Now
closet and it's
now
all
do you
orange.
wear orange in your real life? Like, non-work life?
I wear orange all the time because it's just silly. It's like I went to the grocery store. This is a couple years ago, and I just had a gray T-shirt on and no orange. And somebody came up to me and said, "Joe, you're not wearing orange." And I'm like, "Are you kidding me? I'm just trying to get bread. Do we have to do this?" But yes, I
Apparently
love
you
orange.
do.
Passionate about orange. Everything's orange.
You know what, though? We talk a lot about, right, in content marketing, ways to brand yourself and ways to stand out and, make sure people know who you are. It sounds like you've done a pretty good job of
Oh,
that.
it definitely works. I talk about it in my last book, Content Inc. About you. The future is definitely orange. I talk, anything to differentiate, right? Because we'll talk in this webinar about how you can break through all the content clutter. We call that the content tilt, and you can do that through your content, through the way you tell your stories, and you could do it through color. You could do it through design. So, absolutely,
Yeah.
anything. With everybody's a content creator today. How do you break through? Whatever it takes, right?
Whatever it takes,
Yeah.
that's right. Well, as people are coming in here, Joe, where are you based out of?
I'm in Cleveland, Ohio,
That's right, I did know that.
and
So
you're in Boston,
Cleveland,
correct?
I am, and
Very nice.
Cleveland is one of my absolute favorite cities. I went to school in Ohio, and I have friends in Cleveland, so I actually spend every New Year's in Cleveland. I'm there multiple times a
Oh my
year.
gosh.
Yeah, but I don't ever really want people to know how cool it is because I love that, people like it's kind of like this hidden gem.
Cleveland's come a long way. So
It really
because it's
has.
funny when we, uh, Content Marketing World, the event that we created in 2011, at the time, Cleveland wasn't all that hip and we didn't know. And I didn't know if we could get people to come to Cleveland, but it absolutely worked well. And,
Yeah.
a few years later, we had almost 4,000 people coming into
Wow.
Cleveland for
That's
that event.
fantastic.
Yeah, and I never thought it was going to be possible, but now it's one of those, cool Midwestern cities, great
It
food,
is.
amazing art scene. So not that this is
Yeah.
a tourism bureau of Cleveland
A plug.
webinar, but yes, please come to Cleveland if you're ever in. Hit me up on Twitter.
Yeah. Yeah,
We'll
and
welcome you to the city.
if you're
Yeah.
watching, let us know where you're from. Heck, give us your favorite things about Cleveland if you have it. We're gonna give people another minute or so to come in here. And yeah, you mentioned content marketing world, and we'll get into it for a second of all the different things that you're doing here. Just in the content space. And personally, I just want to thank you as a content marketer myself. I can't even tell you how much I've learned and used all of the things that you have
Thank you.
built. And I'm sure that many of our viewers feel the same way.
Well, it's funny you say
Let
content.
yeah,
It's
go
funny you
ahead.
say content marketer because that wasn't a thing. I've
Yeah,
been in
true.
this industry for
True.
over 20 years now, and
Yeah.
content marketing wasn't used heavily until about 2010. I started
Yeah.
using it in 2001, and then we really went all in when I launched the business, what became Content Marketing Institute in 2007.
Yeah.
But it took a lot of content and a lot of education because we were calling it all kinds of different things: custom publishing, custom media,
Yeah.
member communications, and then finally content. People started to use content marketing more. So it warms my heart that we have an industry, we have a profession. There are things that we do differently than other marketers do, and it's important that we continue that.
It really is. Yeah. And, personally, like my background was always in SEO. So content was this thing that we had to have, that just so important. So, oh, I see we have some new faces popping
Hey,
on
Vegas.
here. Hans, Kaylin, Jasmine. We got a couple of Vegas folks.
My second favorite city.
Um, ooh, is Cleveland number one?
Cleveland's number one. Yes,
Okay.
thank you. Then London is up there too, but I
Yeah,
always love
all
going to
good.
Vegas. So,
Yeah, me too. Well, why don't we get ready to jump in here? Just so everyone knows, I'm just going to do a brief intro to Joe. He has got a fantastic presentation. I am so pumped to see it in action. I saw just the slides themselves. Please feel free to ask questions, as he's going. He might stop and answer them if they apply. If not, like we'll definitely get to some in the end. But for those of you who don't know who Joe is, we were just talking and really just one of the founders of what I would say is the content marketing space. But aside from that, he has multiple startups, including the content creator education site, The Tilt, which you can find on Rally.o. Couple content events, including the Content Entrepreneur event, the Creator Economy Expo, a few books, so 7 best-selling books, just a few, Joe. Content Inc., Epic Content Marketing, which was named must-read business book by Fortune magazine. On top of that, he's got multiple podcasts, Content Inc., This Old Marketing. But what I also think is so fantastic is not just the content stuff and not everything you're contributing to the community around content, but Joe also has a foundation called the Orange Effect, which delivers speech therapy and technology service to over 200 children in 34 states. So, thank you for that and all you do. I'm just going to turn it over to you. Take us away in,
great.
the content marketing space.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Casey. I appreciate the introduction. And I'm going to talk about a model for content marketing. And this model is applicable for agencies, for content marketers, for small content creators as well. It just depends on how you want to adjust it to yourself. And I'm going to talk for between about 20, 25 minutes or so. And then Casey, you and I will come back and we'll do some fun with some questions. So please, if you have any questions at any time, go ahead and ask those. We'll get to them either during or probably after as we go. But just a little premise to this presentation. So Casey, you and I were talking. I've been in this industry since 2000. So over 22 years now, I've been doing this specifically in the content marketing space. And I've had the opportunity to work with hundreds of companies and then interview probably thousands of companies over this time. And we built this model. I call it the Content Inc. model, but it's basically 7 steps to build an audience and what I believe is the core to content marketing. How do you build passionate subscribers to your brand? That's really the essence of what content marketing is. And I'm going to go through the 7-step process. But before we get started, I like to throw this out to everyone because we're already creating so much content, right? Everybody's creating lots of content. We're all content creators. But think about this. If you actually stopped producing your content, would your customers notice? This is a really tough question. When I used to do consulting to, multi-billion-dollar organizations, I had the executive team and I would throw this question out and they would all sit back and look at each other, not sure how to answer, but they all knew the truth that their customers probably wouldn't notice. And we have to get past that. We have to do something special. We have to create valuable, relevant, compelling information on an ongoing basis in order to build those subscribers to our brand, in order for them to do what? Do the marketing that we're trying to do is create a behavior change. So just think about that. I guess I'm trying to raise the ante, if you will, and see if we can do something special for our customers, and then that will help our businesses as we go. This is the model I'm going to talk about. I'm going to go through a lot of this quickly. Just to give you fair warning. So if you have questions about any of these particular steps, please let me know. But this model talked about, there's 100 plus, probably 500 plus companies built into this model itself. But if you want to just look at Financial Times, Red Bull Media House, BuzzFeed, New York Times, Disney, Informa, this is how they built their company. This is how you build an audience. You start by doing one thing or a few things really well, and then you diversify. And you can do this if you sell products and services or whether you're a media company. It really doesn't matter. All the business models to me look exactly the same. The difference is what we sell. So I'm going to go through this. And the first step is the sweet spot. And the sweet spot is really, you all have your sweet spot, but sometimes we have to stop and think about it. So who is your target audience? And I know B2B customers, agencies, you have many different types of audiences, but think about one for the rest of the presentation. It'll be a little bit helpful. But on the one side, where are you could be the leading expert in the world on something. What's your expertise level? And on the other side, what is your audience's desire? What's their pain point? What keeps them up at night? The intersection of that is that's your sweet spot. That's what you're going to talk about. That's what you're going to create content about. And you think about those customer pain points. What keeps them up at night? What's their biggest pain point? What problem can you solve through delivering consistent information? And then you have to make sure that you're looking at an issue, but you're not solving it with your product or service, right? You're not going to pitch them, oh, and buy our product at the end. You're really trying to solve it through the content itself on an ongoing basis, build loyalty, build trust, and they ultimately will buy from you as you go. So that's just, I don't want to spend a lot of time on the sweet spot because you all have one, but you need to go back and look at it and review it. This is what the most important area is. If you said, Joe, if you had to look at the whole model, where should I pay the most attention? The first part is the content tilt. Second part is consistency. We'll get to that. But what is a content tilt? And as Casey and I were talking about before, there's so much content out there. There's so much clutter. How do we break through that competition and actually get noticed? So your content tilt is finding an area of little to no competition that you can actually push through, get noticed, build an audience, and deliver on your marketing objectives. This is no small feat, right? And this is where I would say that most companies stop at a sweet spot. And they say, oh, good. This is what I'm good at. This is what we're going to talk about on our podcast, our blog, our video, whatever. And then here's our customer pain point done. The problem is you might have 100 companies talking about that stuff. You might have 10 people in your competitive set. You might have 10 other influencers. You might say, there's a big company, $1 billion company throwing so much money at that particular content niche. It's hard for you to break through. So you have to rethink your content tilt. This is just a quick example, one of my favorite examples, so you can see what a content tilt is. So Anne Reardon, she's known as the baking queen of Sydney, Australia. She was a stay-at-home mom. She started as a vlogger back in 2012. She got her first 100 YouTube subscribers, and she thought it was the greatest thing ever. She started a content brand called How to Cook That. Now she's got over 5 million subscribers, multimillionaire. She's living her best life, right? How does she go with no budget against all kinds of competition, maybe the most competitive content field in the world, which is about food? And how does she break through and build an audience? She does things like this. She makes almost a working camera out of different parts of chocolate, milk chocolate, dark chocolate. I don't know if you're hungry right now. I am. I would totally eat this camera. This is fantastic. Or I just love everything about chocolate. If you had a 5-pound Snickers bar that you go at that. So she creates those how-to recipes and she goes through them on YouTube. And if you look at her sweet spot, okay, she's a food scientist. So she's a dietitian, registered dietitian. She knows what she's talking about. She knows her audience also wants step-by-step food recipes, but that's really crowded field. So how did she really differentiate that? She talked about impossible dessert creations. Because you look at that camera, that Snickers bar, how did she do that? That's crazy, unbelievable. And you should really just look at her stuff. It's amazing. Every time I look at a piece of her content or her videos, I'm like, how'd she do that? That's incredible. That was her differentiation area. Nobody at the time was talking about impossible dessert creations. And of course, that's how she breaks through, builds an audience, and do all the things she wants to do. So how do you find your content tilt, if you will? And I like starting with a content marketing mission statement. It's like an editorial mission statement that media companies have, but for you, it'd be your content mission statement. Here's an example from Digital Photography School. Really good one because you can find their mission statement right on their About Us page. So let me go through it and I'll go through the different parts. So it says, welcome to Digital Photography School, website with simple tips to help digital camera owners get the most out of their cameras. So there's 3 parts to this. One is, who's your core target audience? You have to be very specific with your audience. In this case, digital camera owners. What are we going to deliver? Simple tips, bulleted lists. This is not long form content. And number 3, the most important, what is the outcome for the audience? Helping them get the most out of their cameras. Now, this mission statement has nothing to do with what they sell. It doesn't say they sell paid ebooks and tutorials and training or anything like that. They just said, this is what we do. You have to create this mission statement for your organization, and it'll help you figure out what your differentiation really is and where you can break through all that clutter. And then once you build this, you give it to all your content creators, all your production designers, all your creative designers, so that they have this and they all know we're all focused on doing this by being amazing, by being this informational expert to this particular audience. I'll give you an example of how you can tilt your audience a little bit. What a lot of companies do wrong is they have a very broad audience. And it's very hard to differentiate to a very broad audience. For example, let's say your audience was plant managers. Well, what if we said instead of plant managers, it's plant managers of companies of 10,000 people or more who outsource parts to India and China? I can be much more specific with our content niche and really position ourselves as the leading expert because we're really focused on just that audience. So that's just one way to do it. There's lots of other ways. You could look at different platforms. You could look at different points of view, but you want to make sure you figure out what's that content tilt, what's that differentiation, and get to a point maybe where there's only 5 to 10 competitors in your set. You could say, and by the way, go more niche. Going more niche is always better. You can always go broader later, but you want to figure out where is that place that we can be the expert. And if you ask yourself that question, you're saying there's no way we can do that. You're probably not niche enough. So go down a little bit more. All right. Third step is all about building the base. If you look at the greatest media companies and content marketing examples from all of time, they all start by doing one thing really well and building their base. Red Bull Media House started as a print magazine, actually, which became the Red Bulletin. New York Times newspaper. Huffington Post started as one blog. TED Talk series. So they started by doing one thing well, and now they're all integrated publishing companies that do a million different things, but they started by doing one thing well. And this is where a lot of content marketers go wrong, because we want to do all the things, but we shouldn't be doing all the things. We really need to focus. So we don't want to diversify too quickly. And it's so hard to do that because you're getting pressure internally. You feel like I got to be on TikTok and I got to be doing Twitter Spaces. It doesn't mean you can't do those to market your content, but there's one place you probably need to call home. If you look at Mr. Beast, one of the greatest YouTubers on the planet, he's known as a YouTuber. Hassan Piker is known as a Twitch streamer. They do a lot of other things, but they're known for one thing. So you can be the best at that one thing and build an audience. And the reason why it really doesn't work is we only have so much what I call content energy. And again, Casey, I love chocolate, so I put it in all my presentations. But if you look at this, this is a chocolate bar, and this is all the energy you have as your marketing department for your content marketing activities. I don't care how big you are, you only have so much energy, only so much time or focus to go into. Most of us do this, right? We do, okay, let's throw a little bit to the blog. We'll have a so-so podcast. We'll do an okay research project. We'll have a horrible e-newsletter. We'll do adequate social media, and we'll maybe have a fairly good event. But none of it's great. None of it's breaking through. None of it's building a passionate subscriber to your brand. We've got to do better, and it makes more sense to do something like this. And I know you're all saying, ouch, we can't do that. But when I go in and do most of my consulting, I'll get done and the content marketer will expect me to recommend 18 content ideas. And most of the time I'm saying, look, you have to kill some things. You're doing 15 things and you're doing none of them exceptionally well. So let's take some of those resources and some of that focus and say no to some things and say yes, a big yes to a few things. So I'm going to do one of the greatest e-newsletters in our industry and the most amazing podcast and focus on that. And that's where we see the Red Bull Media Houses, the New York Times and the TEDs and the Huffington Post being born by focusing on this kind of a strategy. Homemade Simple did it really well. It's a Procter & Gamble brand. They started with just a blog and an e-newsletter, and now they have a fully diversified media strategy around this as they went. Morning Brew, I'm a big fan of Morning Brew. I get it every morning. They just started with a newsletter. That was it. And now they've got all kinds of stuff. They've got training, they've got products, they've got videos, they're on social media, all this. They're doing all the things. But they first started by just building a minimum viable audience and building that base. Mr. Beast, I mentioned, same thing. It's got his own burger chain, doing a ton of different things, but just started by sending out consistent videos every week to his audience and doing it extremely well. So this is it. This is the model. Who's our audience? A well-defined target audience. What's my content tilt? It's a differentiation area. Focus on one content type. Is it audio, video, textual plus image? and then one main platform. Is it YouTube? Is it going to be a podcast series? Is it going to be on TikTok? Is it going to be Instagram, Reels, whatever the case is? So you have to pick that. Doesn't mean you can't do all the other things, but what's your home base to start with as you go? And then when you do that, I talked about the content tilt. The second most important thing is consistency. We have to be like Norman Cheers, right? We show up on time every time. And when we do, we say something interesting. So that's a really good litmus test for everything you send out. Okay, are we sending it out consistently? Like if you have a newsletter, is it going out the same time every week or every day, whatever the frequency is? And then are we really interesting when we do that? You go back to your executive team. Do your customers, would they miss your information that you're sending? Are you that valuable? We have to up that ante, because mediocre content doesn't cut it. It probably hurts you more because you're wasting resources. If you're just going to do mediocre content, I would say don't do content marketing. Go buy advertising. It's no go to traditional PR. It's fine. Content marketing takes a commitment. It's a marathon, but you got to do it consistently every day as you go through. So the first 3 steps: sweet spot, find your content tilt, you build that base, you build what we call a minimum viable audience. And now it's all about, you've got it going. We're feeling good. And now we're into audience building. And I think this is the key part. When you've got something going, you really want to focus on subscribers as the key metric. And specifically, if you can, I know it's old school, but email, membership and email are at the top of the subscriber hierarchy. Now, there's nothing wrong with, like, a good friend of mine, Wally Koval, created a brand called Accidentally Wes Anderson. AWA has over 1.6 million followers on Instagram, built his home on that platform. The problem is, has no control over that platform, has no control of the algorithm, can't do much. So as a business owner, if you don't have control of your distribution, it's really scary. So we have to move from rented land to owned property whenever we can. And we want to go up the hierarchy and say, okay, great. Wally has those million followers. Now he has about 75,000 email subscribers that he's added, and building that asset up. That is the real asset you can have. And if I look at somebody's follower count, I'll say, oh, Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn, and those are all great. Most important one I'm looking at, opt-in email subscribers or an owned membership site or something like that. And maybe down the road, if you have confidence in that, something around Web3. But I'm not going to get into that today as we go. Really good example, Charlotte LeBay from Brain Balance, 80,000 Instagram subscribers. Still, that's her base. Instagram is still home, but she's turned that into 50,000 email subscribers. She's able to sell more, market better through email. Went from 2 to 19 people. Really a great success story as she went. And to make this work, you absolutely need a remarkable newsletter. You're probably thinking, email, too much spam. It's old school, Joe. Don't give me the email stuff. Look, you all have 1, 2, or 3 maybe emails that you open a day that are really, really important. You just have to make sure as a company, if you're sending out an email, you become one of those 1, 2, or 3 that your target audience opens. So create that remarkable newsletter. It's really important. If you look at BuzzFeed and their strategy, they were really hurting when Facebook changed their algorithms back in 14, 15. Then they started doing really well because they said, instead of focusing on building just our social channels, let's focus on our email channels. Now they have over 60 different targeted email newsletters, well over 1 million subscribers. It's an amazing turnaround what BuzzFeed has been able to do. But that's a good example of, and by the way, all of these are very specific, targeted to individual needs and pain points as they go. All right. Now you're saying, Joe, you're probably saying, hey, how do we get some revenue here? It's great. So we're creating all this content. We're building the base. We're building subscribers. Now we can go and look at how do we drive different revenue, different KPIs as we move forward. So if we look at the Content Inc. model going forward, there's actually 10 different ways that we can drive revenue. If you look at the inside of your loyal, first of all, you got to build your loyal audience. That's the first thing we're looking at building. You can drive revenue direct ways, which is the middle 6. Those are traditionally media revenue drivers. And then the outside are traditional content marketing revenue drivers, product services, loyal customers, and better customers. And I'll quickly go through here. By the way, as a content marketer, whether you work for an agency, whether you work for a product or service company, whether you're a media company, you can use all of these. There's no difference, in my opinion. I talked about this before, between the media model and a product and service model when it comes to content marketing and content creation. It's all the same. You can drive revenue. Robert Rose and I wrote a book, Killing Marketing, years ago, where we said the marketing area is not an expense. It's a profit center. I believe this model can create a profit center. So these first 6 are profit or revenue directed off of your subscriber base directly from the content. So just advertising, subscription. So we have a newsletter called The Tilt, which is for content creators. We sell advertising in that as we go. I used to have a magazine with Content Marketing Institute. We had Chief Content Officer magazine. We sold advertisements in this, so that would be revenue generating. You might say, hey, how do we generate event revenue from this? We have our own event called the Creator Economy Expo that Casey mentioned going forward. If you look at Salesforce, has a Dreamforce. So all these content marketing initiatives, there's an event. HubSpot has inbound, really important revenue and profit generators, premium content models. Like, I'll sell my book, I'll sell an ebook, I'll sell an audio book. If you have donations, you have site like a Mother Jones or Wikipedia that take donations. If your content's that good, you can get donation support for it. Some people use an affiliate marketing model. If you look at John Lee Dumas with Entrepreneurs on Fire, a good portion of his revenue from his podcast is from affiliate marketing. So if we have trusted partners, we could drive revenue from affiliates. And then there's subscriptions. So if you look at a company like a copy blogger, they've got over 200,000 subscribers. They talk about copywriting and blogging and SEO. They have a membership where you can buy a subscription for $495 a year. So those are all your direct. You're like, those are traditional media. Now you get into, okay, well, what are my content marketing revenue drivers? You could sell more products. If you're the Hustle sells products through their Trends program that they launched, very successful, by the way. I think I'll talk about this later, but the Hustle was purchased by HubSpot not too long ago. Or you could sell services. You have Brian Fanzel from NFT 365. A lot of his revenue from his podcast is derived from consulting revenue. So you build an audience to drive so agency's really good about this. You can blow out your agency revenues if you really build a loyal audience over time. That becomes your prospects and then your customer base. Or you could say, oh, I want to build more loyal customers. This was the reason why the Furrow magazine, which started in 1895, it still goes on today, from John Deere. Why did they create this magazine? Why do they still do it today? To keep people buying John Deere equipment. And then how do you create better customers, more valuable customers? And Think Money from TD Ameritrade is a great one. They send out this digital and print magazine on an ongoing basis to their customers. And the traders that get this magazine, those that read the magazine, trade 5 times more than those that don't. So they've created a better customer out of that. So it's a really amazing example. So those are the 10 different types of revenue. And then once we built that base, now we can look at really diversifying. So this is where, before I said, don't go ahead and diversify too quickly. Focus. First you focus, you build that minimum viable audience. Then you can go ahead and diversify and do different things. So back to Morning Brew, just started the newsletter. Then they launched the podcast. Then they go ahead and launch their business education training. So this is what happens when you start building an audience, and you can do these kinds of things, because we know if our audience signs up to more of these things, they become a more loyal audience. That's why we end up diversifying. And we can buy diversification. So I mentioned this before. HubSpot, they wanted to diversify into the entrepreneurial space. They're like, oh, we could build something, or we can go ahead and buy the Hustle, which I think was reported for $27 million, which in my opinion was a steal. So you could do those types of things if you want to buy. And I really recommend that. And I've done this for a long time. I've got my hit list of companies that I'm always looking at. You should have a hit list of companies that you're looking at. Those could be competitors, YouTubers, podcasters, newsletters providers. Make your wish list. And then you want to build over time relationships with those people so you can do partnership activities with them. But you might say, hey, we could buy them. Content Marketing Institute probably would have never had a successful exit. We sold the business, my wife and I, in 2016. We probably wouldn't have been successful if we didn't purchase an awards program, which became the Content Marketing Awards. We purchased a West Coast Tech event, which became the Content Tech event. And that added to the value of our company. We're able to have a successful exit. So let's say that you want to start a relationship with an audience. You're like, it takes time. Like, this model takes 18, 24 months to really start working. But if you have the cash to do some five figure, some six figure, some seven figure deals, I would absolutely look at that. I'll tell you what, every major enterprise out there right now is doing this. If you ask me what is a really good expertise area that a content marketer needs to work on right now, it's understanding mergers and acquisitions, specifically acquisitions, because this is going to be big for the next 5 years as there's so much consolidation that'll happen in the content creation field. And then the last step, what could you become? What could you end up looking like as you blow this out? And Arrow Electronics is a great example. They distribute electronics equipment. They have all these brands, over 50 plus different brands that are a little bit separate from the organization, but they have somebody running this. Most of these were actually purchased. Some were organic, but most of them were purchased from outside entities. And now if you said, well, who's the leading media company for B2B electronics engineers, I would say it's not a traditional media company. It's Arrow Electronics with over 3 million opt-in subscribers. So this is what you're starting to see. This is what you're starting to see with the Red Bull media houses and as we go forward. So again, if you do this model, you have to commit to it. There's no dabbling in content marketing. It probably will take you 12 to 18 months to build a minimum viable audience that's worth generating revenue from. Sometimes you're not going to see results in 6 to 9 months. So if you said, Joe, what can I expect in 6 to 9 months? You might get some really good qualitative information, but you might not have enough to say it's driving direct revenue yet, or it's leading to purchase behavior in some way. So you have to set the expectations of patience in your organization in order to keep this thing going, because once you get by that 18-month mark, then you really start to see things happening. Most content marketing programs fail, not because of their content tilts off or their consistency's off. They fail because they stop. They've killed the program between 6 and 9 months because they didn't give it a chance and the expectations weren't set in the first place. So before we get to questions, it's 4 things that I would really look at. First, probably need to be more specific with your audience. That might mean breaking up your audience into different areas. If you're a B2B company, you probably have 6 to 9 buyer personas, if you will. You don't have to do a content marketing program for each one of those. Focus on one first, get great at that one, and then you can take what you've learned and duplicate it over. If you don't have a content marketing mission statement, please get one. Work with your team on it. Figure out what it is. Figure out what's your differentiation area. And then I would really focus on, are you truly different in some way? Figure out that competitive set as you're moving forward and see if you are delivering something truly different so that you can break through. So when somebody sees you right away, like, oh, that's what they do. That's what they can solve in my life. And then probably instead of doing more right now, instead of, oh yeah, you got to be on TikTok or you got to do a Twitch stream or whatever, you probably need to kill some things. Like you look at some things, do a cursory content audit, look at some things that you're not doing very well, that aren't additive. Maybe you're putting some resources to and say, well, what if we killed these 2 things and focused on being great at these other things? And that's where I think you're going to get the most mileage out short term, if you will. So all my information is here. You can get, I talk about the whole model in Content Inc. Just released the second version of that. I'm everywhere at Joe Polizzi, and there's the Tilt, which I hope you subscribe to. It's a great newsletter. But we have some good time, Casey, for questions, and I'm really looking forward to getting into to some of these.
Yeah, please ask your questions. We have a couple that have come in, so I want to make sure we get to those. But I have some for sure. That was a great presentation. I love all the examples. That chocolate camera is amazing.
I know, right? You just want to dig in.
Yeah. But my first one, and really this is coming from, an agency perspective, you talk about that 18 to 24 months and
Yep.
how do you sell, and this really applies to in-house, whether you're an in-house content marketer, you're an agency, how do you sell that vision of, look, like we really have to just dedicate 2 years of our lives and money to this?
Well, knowing the facts about what it takes to build a loyal audience and a media company, generally it takes 2 to 3 years to build a profitable media company. Sometimes even longer. Look at your Morning Brew, right? They started in 2016. They had nothing in 2017, barely anything in 18 and 19. They really started to go forward. So knowing that, I think is helpful when you talk to your executives. But I probably would challenge the fact. I think that most organizations already know this is important. When I started really selling this in 2010, 11, we were selling the fact that what is content marketing? And this is why it's important. And we talked about Casey, you're from SEO. So we were selling, oh, it's a great SEO benefit. We could be number one for all these searches and things like that. But I think people understand that, we want to build an audience. We want our customers to look at us as thought leaders. We want to be important to our customers when they're not buying our products and services. How do we do that? All the in-between times, that's where content marketing comes in. So I think that your executives are ready to be challenged. We just haven't necessarily put it all together strategically. So that's where you have to kill some things and I think make some decisions and go forward and say, what's that big mission? So instead of saying, if you look at CMI research, Casey, I think the average company does 13 to 16 different things from a content standpoint. So they do research, they do events, they do Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and TikTok and God help us, all the other things, right? We're doing all the things. The problem is we're doing all the things mediocre. So instead of, and there's nothing wrong with experimentation. I'm a big fan of it because sometimes you don't know where you need to build your base. But at some point, the CEO is going to say, hey, we've been doing the blog. We've been doing the podcast. We've been doing all these things. And what do I get for it? Where's that strategy you told me about? So now's the time to get strategic and say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're trying to be the leading expert to this group of people. This is the pain point we're trying to solve. Here's our content tilt and differentiation area. Here's how we're going to do it. How are we going to market that? So you've got your content as product. And then how do you market that product ongoing? And then you're going to do a marketing plan for your content product, just like you do it for your regular products. And that's where a lot of people go wrong is they don't understand that your content is a product. And you have to, you and I both have been, how many corporate blogs have you seen that they just blog and maybe they'll tweet it out once and then that's it? Well, it's fine. It's fine. It's most, right? It's fine. Podcast the same way. It's fine. Nobody's listening to our podcast. Well, how are we marketing it? You have to put paid, earned, owned all around that strategy and get people to find that to build that audience. And then once you get to a minimum viable audience, then it starts to grow on itself. But it takes some time.
I think that's a perfect transition to one of the questions that we have, which is how do you go about promoting that content, right? Like, is it, what are some of the strategies that people can think about in terms of as you're building that content and trying to build that authority and relevancy, like what can people be thinking about?
So Marie, great question. And the answer is yes. All of it. I'll give you some examples so you don't think I'm just having fun with you. So what is your content niche area? So for the tilt, our content niche area is all around the content entrepreneur. We're trying to help the content creator become a real business owner and be financially independent. So we have a rolling list of 50 to 100 keywords that we target: creator economy, content entrepreneur, TikTok creator, the whole thing that we're looking at. And then we create content for our newsletter specifically around those things. So SEO, absolutely. I know my keywords and my rankings on every major category. We're looking to look at old content, updating that content, all those things. We look at partnerships are really critical. So we have partnerships with a number of influencers that target the same people we do so that we get insertions into their newsletter. They talk about us on the podcast. I do a lot of similar to what I'm doing today. I do a lot of webinars and a lot of podcast guests in order to promote what I'm doing, what we're doing, because it all helps each other. We, market it through the book. We have a newsletter that we target. We do paid media just like everyone else does to make sure our newsletter is found. We do, we'll do social, but we try to do consistent social. So we'll take our newsletter, like our key article for our newsletter, and we'll create like a 5-slide Instagram show that'll go on Instagram so people can see that that's a little bit more valuable. So we try to do the few things that we do really well, but the answer is yes to all of it. I think probably the one area that most marketers don't do enough of is influencer partnerships. And when I say that, I don't mean like, we have to with YouTubers or the latest Instagram star or TikTok star. Maybe, yes. But a lot of your influencers are who are the media companies that are targeting the same people that you are, who are some of the competitors, who are some of the independent newsletter writers, who are the journalists. Those are the people that you want to work with on different projects. Make a list of the top 20 or 30 influencers in your area, and then figure out, okay, which are the ones that are open to working with us, and create a project with each of them. Oh, this is an ebook project. Here's a research project, and all things that would market the stuff that you're doing already.
Yeah, I like that. It's endless, right? It's really endless.
It really is. And
Um,
you have to choose. Just choose
yeah,
wisely. Do a few things really well. Something that's not
yeah.
working, you can kick off and try something new.
Well, on that same vein and talking about choosing, you mentioned like you only have so much energy, right? So how can how do people determine where they should be focused, right? How do they determine which platform is the best for them, where they should be putting their energy?
So you have a choice. You don't have to be on TikTok because it's the fastest growing, most addictive. Although you may have some people in your organization and you may have a content area that makes sense for that. I don't know. I would look at the talent that you currently have in your organization or what you have access to. So I'll give you an example. If you have some really good writers as part of your marketing team, or you have engineers in your organization that have maybe can do some step-by-step stuff, it may be a blog. Maybe you hire an editor to work with those engineers to get out that raw content, to put a blog together on a regular basis. That blog is tied to your newsletter. Great. You've got some really textual plus image content that you're going for. Or maybe you have some really good instructors and you might say, oh, good, that sets up for a good podcast or YouTube series. So I mean, go through each one. And I would actually go through, okay, well, here's who's the target audience. What's the information we're trying to solve? And then you have to come up with what your show is. Like, you're not just creating content to create, like, what's the thing that you're doing? Just like you're a Netflix series. Like, what's the series and what's the show? And I think a lot of people don't put that kind of creativity into it. They say, oh, we need to have a blog content. You don't have to blog today. No, you don't. Like, what's your
Yeah.
blog about? What's the theme? What's the editorial calendar? What's the big tent pieces of content that you're going to create? You can do that with everything that you do. So, I mean, you might opt to say, because video is a little bit maybe more opportunities in video than text right now. I don't know. I tend we had to tilt. We had a lot of decisions to make for this, and we decided that we were going to go with textual was going to be our core, because most of us are writers. So we started writing, and we said, instead of building on a platform that's rented, we're going to build our own platform and focus on email
Mhm.
subscribers. So our base is an email newsletter. So we
Yeah.
send it every Tuesday and Friday. So we decided to do that based on textual content. And then every once in a while, we'll do a special video that's integrated into the newsletter. So that's what we decided. But that's based on our strengths and areas. And then, of course, what are your customers doing? If you don't have any customers on TikTok, just, right? No,
Oh,
don't
no,
do
I'm
it.
with you.
You
Yeah.
don't do it. Where are your customers hanging out? And then that'll help you make your decision.
What you said is so important, and it's common sense, but people don't think about that, is what are your strengths, right? Like, so often we think, oh, well, we're supposed to be doing this,
Right.
so we
What are you
should,
good at?
versus what
And
are
what do
we
you like
actually
doing?
good at?
What do you
Yes.
like doing too? What's good? What are you going to be passionate about?
Yeah.
Like, if
Yeah.
you don't want to get up and say, "Oh, I got to do that podcast," and I don't want to do, like. And somebody told me the other day, said they wanted to do a podcast. They had all the equipment. They were really excited. They had the theme, but they didn't want to do a guest show. And I said, "Well, don't do a guest show. Test out a solo show. Like, why do you have to? Just because
Right.
most podcasts are Q&A guest shows doesn't mean you have to do it that way. Create a
Exactly.
new format. See how it goes."
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We think we have to do things. You mentioned having good writers, and I thought this was an interesting question. So, how do you factor in AI creators, right? AI content. Like, what's your opinion on this as we see more and more of this coming up?
AI. Oh my gosh. Robert Rose and I just recorded our This Old Marketing podcast, and we just had a long discussion about that, because it was the OpenAI just launched they've been launching their graphic program where you can talk and you can speak and say, I want a crazy looking robot in the middle of an ocean, and it will spit out an image for you immediately. And they also announced that they will give you the rights to that image. And we were talking about, oh my God, there's a lot of designers that are really, and then we got onto the content creation side, and the same thing. I mean, there's a lot of content writing tools that are doing these things for us. And this is not the end of it, right? Just like we were talking about designers going from hand drawn, hand sketched, hand created to using a software piece like an Adobe and Illustrator to do these types of things. Now we're getting into more artificial intelligence type stuff, and that's just going. And so my thing is, as a content marketer, we have to be focused on strategic thinking. That's where the things like acquisitions come in, and because you're going to have more and more of the tasks that maybe you don't even want to do all the time, but are being able to done by different software programs. So I don't even need to say AI, or we don't have to talk about AI. We could just talk about software, whether it's AI driven or whether it's just regular software doing a program. There's a lot of things that do things for us. And we want to make a list on an ongoing basis of, okay, here's all the things that we do as content creators. What are some things that can be done through software? What are some things that we should outsource to other people, not inside our department? And what are things that we should do? And you should go through this every 6 months, because what happens is you start doing something from a content creation standpoint that you shouldn't be doing, or you don't want to do, or you hate doing, or you're not good at doing. So be a media company. If you're a media company, you're definitely outsourcing, or you're using whatever product and service makes the most sense for that. So, and to be honest, just my personal preference, I have no idea where this is going to go, but it's going to get crazy.
I mean,
with the whole
Google,
AI thing.
did you
Yeah.
see Google's like sentient AI now has a lawyer, has its own lawyer? Like what?
It's kind of crazy where we're going. I mean, and like, are we going to get to a point where, oh yeah, I want content that's human created versus computer
Right.
created, and then where does the human involvement stop? It's always a continuum, right? There's technology involved somewhere along the line. So we're just in for a lot. For right now, I don't know where it's going to go. My advice is we want to think as strategically as possible. That's why we talk about this today. That's why we talk about the 7 steps. We talk about what could be, and we talk about the time and the strategy. I mean, strategy is really about saying no to a lot of things that waste your time, so you can say yes to some things that really make a big deal in your career. So that's what we want to focus on.
Exactly, especially when we know that like one of the biggest struggles of content marketers is time and resources, right? So it's always thinking about that
I think it
stuff.
is the number one. I think if you look at the
Yeah.
research that CMI did, and we did some at the Tilt, it's what takes up the most time and what are you most concerned about? Is
Yeah.
content creation and the time to do it.
Yeah. A little bit of a different way, but I think this is a really interesting question because it ties in the online to offline element, and you were talking about revenue. So one of our questions is when you're creating small town business content that sells services and products, but they don't necessarily sell online, what's the best approach to keep it steady and growing over time, right? Even if it's not just you're not selling something online.
Well, the if I understand, first of all, thank you for the question. If I understand this right, um, it doesn't matter ultimately what you sell. Like, first of all, what is the content product that you're trying to build a relationship with is this a digital product? Is this a print magazine? I love custom print magazines. I think they're great. I think it's a great opportunity. So if you are doing a small, like, there's been a lot of purchases in the small town newspaper business right now because they have a loyal audience, and print still works, believe it or not. That lean back technology still works. Or events, ongoing road shows, events where you're getting people together. Those are very, very valuable. So first of all, just focus on whatever it is that you're building the audience through. Great. Secondarily is whatever you're selling. So you just need, at some point, you're going to want the call to action for whatever that is. Is that a meeting? Is that a place? Did they go to a store? What is that? So I guess I would say that's a separate thing. First of all, I'm building an audience. And then what do I want that audience to do? What's the behavior change I want to see? That's the second thing.
Yeah. Just thinking about, you mentioned like print and these different channels. One of the things that stood out to me was you talked about the owned versus rented land. And you mentioned BuzzFeed and Facebook, and really we saw warnings for years about this, right? With like just organic reach in social networks declining and declining. Are there any other networks right now that kind of make you apprehensive?
Well, we're dealing with this a lot in my current company because so many of the young creators are building on platforms they have no control over. And there's a big fight, right? Because there's a lot of creators that say, "Oh, YouTube's not paying me enough, or Apple's not paying me enough for my app, or Facebook is taking too much revenue or whatever." Well, they can set the rules, they can do whatever they want. And there's no reason why we can't continue to use those tools. So great. use Instagram, use TikTok, but what's that secondary strategy to move that to something that you control? And this is, by the way, this is any business. It's not just content marketing. You have to control your distribution wherever you can. If you don't control your distribution as a content creator, as a content marketer, it's terrible. It like, because it could stop at any moment. We could get banned off of Twitter tomorrow, right? Facebook could change their algorithm, and you know what? They do all the time. So we just have to make sure. So TikTok scares me, if you're asking me, because it's
Yeah.
so addictive, and I don't want it's the fastest I've seen people build an audience is on TikTok. And YouTube was a little bit like that. And then we had Instagram, which was much faster, accelerated. And then TikTok's even more accelerated.
Yeah.
Twitch to a certain extent, but it's hard to get found on Twitch, streaming platform. So that's the concern. And then people will build their influencer status, if you will, on TikTok. So great. How do you build off of that? That's why I love email newsletter. That's why I'm trying to figure out, okay, is there anything to this Web3 token environment that we can build a token economy or a currency so that we can own something? Yeah, I mean, that's a concern for me. I'm always looking at it. TikTok is the most scary. It's just the most scary from a media addiction standpoint. I've never seen anything like it. I really expect, unless things drastically change, that it will be the number one media company in the next 3 to 4 years. It's already projected to have more advertising revenue than YouTube in just 2 years. And YouTube had a 6 or 7 year head start on them. Maybe more than that, 10-year head start. Yeah. So it's amazing what they've done with that algorithm. And it's not just kids. It's all audience groups now. So
I just saw an article today that I loved because I was like, this is my dream. There's a retirement house TikTok community, and it's like they've basically created like a joke of, you know, the influencer houses, but it's people in their like 70s and 80s. And they're, you know, the whole premise is that it's reaching all these different audiences, which I think is so cool. It's just so unique, right? Compared to these other channels.
But again, with all those that are working, what are they doing? They're finding kind of a show model. Like, what is that? What are we different at? And then we consistently deliver. So look at all the TikTokers that are doing really well. They deliver usually on the same day, at the same time, all the time. I mean,
yeah, I mean, it's a lot of work. That's exactly it. People don't realize how much work it is.
I mean, it's a full, that's why at the end of this presentation, I said, if you can't make the time to do this really well, you might decide not to. You could do partnerships with other people. There's lots of other things to do, but if you do it, there's a huge opportunity probably after that 12 to 18 month mark, once you build that audience.
Well, we still have about 5 minutes left. So if you have questions, get them in. You know, I want to go back because this is one of the first things that stood out to me because I don't hear people talk about this a lot. And you talked about, you know, the breakdown of audience and going niche, right? So, and going even more niche. So I would almost ask the same question I asked about the platforms, which is how do you decide which niche audience to start with? You know, how do you evaluate to determine which is going to be the most valuable to
me? If you're on the marketing side, you want to start with what your marketing problem is. Right. And we're talking a lot about media strategies here, but really this is, marketing. So what do we start? What is the marketing objective? So that's what I would probably start with. So if you have to sell more stuff, or you need to increase loyalty or subscriptions, or you want more consulting revenue, or you want to charge more for your services, you know, what is that thing? And then you figure out, okay, well, let's start looking at our audiences. Who's our customer base, or what kinds of customers do we want more of, or what's the customer we want to target that we want them to spend more for our services? So that's where I would start with. So not necessarily, so that would be the most valuable audience for you if that's your marketing objective. So you go and say, okay, well, this is our marketing objective. And then we want to figure out, okay, what's our return on that objective? So we want to increase yield. You want to increase loyalty. You want to do all those things. So the question is, if you focus on that target audience, let's say it's an audience of CEOs in mechanical engineering software companies. Well, is that niche enough from an audience standpoint? Okay, let's say it is. Then you look at the topic. Okay, we're talking about cloud computing, let's just say. Okay, well, that's not niche enough because 1,000 companies are covering cloud computing. How are we going to talk about cloud computing in a different way for these CEOs? We may talk about the financial impacts of cloud computing in mechanical engineering. Oh, boom. We can do that better than anyone else. And our target audience is going to think this is the most important thing to their day.
Yeah.
So, a really good, it's funny because they just sold to Informa, but a Industry Dive is a media company. They started in construction and marketing and utility and engineering, and now they're in 23 different sectors. The B2B marketing strategy, even if you're a consumer company, that B2B strategy works really well. We're going to focus on one audience in one sector, and do that really well. And we're going to build that base, and then we're going to build out all these diversified media products to solve their problems better than anyone else. I don't care if you're an agency. I don't care if you're selling consulting. I don't care if you're selling products and services. That's a great model. So go back to your marketing, and then how can you fill that need from that standpoint and say, okay, for that audience in that content niche, great. And by the way, from a tool standpoint, I love using Google Trends. Free tool. I go use it all the time, where if you could type in a keyword, you might want to look at, okay, here's variations, here's up and coming hot keywords that people are using that you may not even know of. So I like to look at that from say, oh, we don't really have our content niche. Well, let's look at some variations that might make the most sense. And then honestly, talk to your customers. I mean, the best thing I can tell you is, whether it's an online survey or whether you can actually talk to them face to face, what are the pain points? What's keeping them up at night? What's the thing that they don't have from an informational standpoint that they should? We don't do enough
So
talking to
underrated.
customers as marketers, and our marketers know that because we're doing the content and we're in all meetings all day. But we have to spend some time. When I was started in media, Casey, I was forced to talk to 5 readers every week. Best thing I ever was forced to do. Because I was like, why do you want to call to me? I say, I'm just finding out what your information needs are. What are you struggling with? Whatever. And I found out more from that, sold more advertising off of that than anything else, because I really understood what our audience needed.
Yeah, and I worked in house for a few years, and one of the things we did is the marketing team met with the sales team every week, or the support team, to talk about what were the things that customers were struggling with, right? Because that's a direct line to what we needed to be talking about.
That's right.
On that same thing of differentiation, one of the questions that we have from the audience is really around, and I think it ties into, you mentioned earlier about print. But what are like the different approaches to like rural versus urban? So for example, like print and radio might do better in like smaller communities, or like I think about like my small town, Facebook, right? Like people just live on Facebook. Are there anything that you can discuss around that?
I'm not a location-based expert, so I would just tell you that my gut feeling is a lot of the people in rural towns are also on the internet, just like urban towns. So what are they doing? Your point about Facebook groups is really important. TikTok, are they listening? Maybe they're not listening to as many podcasts. Maybe they are. So if you don't know, talk to them. Like before we, I took a sabbatical and then relaunched a company called The Tilt. Before I did any of that, we had a base of customers that I talked to and I did a bunch of surveying with to figure out what were they doing? How are the email habits? What were they doing with videos and podcasts and whatever? So I would say, if you're targeting a rural audience, what can you find out about them before you do anything? Because if you want to be a great content marketer, you have to know your audience better than anyone else. So don't do anything before you know who that audience is. So I would just go find out. The data is most likely available for the group that you're trying to target. Or somebody has that. Talk to them about getting that data, and then you can have an informed decision about what makes the most sense from a content standpoint.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that's going back to data, right? I mean, even if part of your business is online, like what's your analytics showing you? Where are people based? What some of that. Well, we are out of time here, but Joe, where can people find you if they have other questions or they want to connect?
Sure. Connect on social media at Joe Pulizzi, Twitter, LinkedIn. I'm at Joe Pulizzi, Pulizzi, everywhere. And then thetilt.com. If you liked anything we're talking about, we send out a newsletter twice a week at thetilt.com talking about this stuff. So
Well, I
That's
liked
it.
it. I'm definitely subscribing. That was
Thank you.
fantastic. Thank you to Duda for hosting us
Thanks,
today.
Duda.
Thank you all for attending. And I think that wraps it up. So I hope everyone has a great day. And thanks again, Joe.
Thanks, Casey. Appreciate it.